Good evening, Zola. Good evening, everybody else. Once again, welcome to Moments in Time. My name is Odie Hawkins, and I've been reading you columns from a newspaper called the African Times that I wrote for 1996 to 1998. And I found after rereading the columns that they were somewhat pertinent to today's news. So I decided to read them, and that's exactly what I'm doing. I missed a day last week. Well, according to it was something that happened beyond my control. So I'll try to make up for that this evening. I'm starting on something called the title of the column is called Media Watch. Like I said, the African Times newspaper, and the publisher was a man named Mr. Charles Anchian. This particular column is called "Where is Africa?" Now, if we just casually check out what's happening in West Africa right now, in Niger, for example, that'll give you some cue as to how pertinent this thing is. 1996. A week of careful study of the nation's leading mainstream newspapers reveals several interesting things. Africa is obviously not considered newsworthy unless there's a catastrophe, a famine, a war, or a coup. I suspect that South Africa is given a bit more consideration because of its white population. The March 30th, 1996 issue of the Los Angeles Times had a second-page, 3-column piece on the problems that the South African Assembly was experiencing, hammering out the details of the post-apartheid constitution. And of course, a number of stories have chronicled the breakdown of the Mandela marriage. Aside from these specific items, we return to the original premise that the mainstream print media does not consider Africa newsworthy unless there is a catastrophe, a famine, a war, or a coup. Why? There are many reasons. I would like to only suggest 3. Racism is the leading character, functioning so deeply in the Western psyche that most of the editors who dismiss stories about Africa would automatically deny that they're infected by the disease, racism. Africa subconsciously is still thought to be the dark continent. It only takes a hard glance at the Discovery Channel and the latest African-based film, if you can find one, Ace Ventura, to see that. And the biggest reason for the oblivious position that Africa occupies in the American mainstream media proves the point rests solidly on the shoulders of African Americans. We don't lobby for media coverage of African events, news. We don't. News developments, or as most of us know, American institutions only respond to constituencies, to pressure groups, to use a crude label for it. Every daily newspaper in every state in America should carry some item of news about Africa, north, south, east, and or west. We, African Americans and others who consider the world a global village, should demand that of our media sources. It isn't enough that we are saturated with TV profiles of whites who were trekked off to save the elephants in Zambia, or record hyena behavior on the Serengeti Plains, or study gorilla families in Kwanda and monkey shines in other places. We must have up-to-date coverage of items of events in Liberia, as well as Bosnia, and Ethiopia, as well as Taiwan, Africa, as well as Europe. Sounds simple to me. The generic reason for this necessity is to enable the citizens of the earth to have a more balanced, less prejudiced point of view of each other. Specifically, a more comprehensive coverage of Africa's geography, customs, movies, ethnic groups, arts, music, systems of government, languages, attitudes, psychology would enhance the relationship of continental Africans and diaspora Africans. The level of ignorance maintained by many African Americans about their ancestral land is stupefying. Stupefying. Those who are in the know really know, but for many others, zip. I feel it's largely this pool of ignorance that fosters many self-negating attitudes. A brief story to illustrate my point. I was writing radio scripts for a popular series. It was canceled after 2 years. At one point in my life, I wrote a story of an Igbo boy and a Yoruba girl who fell in love prior to the Nigerian Civil War. And what happened to this African version of Romeo and Juliet? The producer and I had a chat about the piece. Producer, he says, it's a fine little story, really, really fine, well written and all. But I think it would work better if you changed the location. Me. Why? Producer. Well, I think it would be more believable, you know, me. You think our listeners would have a problem believing that Africans fall in love? Oh, no. I don't think that would be a problem. It's just that I think it needs a more romantic setting. Me. Are you saying you can't imagine a romantic setting in Nigeria? Well, to his credit, he produced the show and used the proper setting. Nigeria, Africa. He even took my advice and cut out the violin-based background music. Incidentally, the producer was an African American from Detroit. There's more. Some of us equate Africa with the Serengeti Plains, that incredible ecosystem where carnivorous beasts perpetually stalk, kill, and devour gazelles, zebras, and other grazing animals, followed by the creatures who clean up the remains, desert garbage, as it were, the buzzards, jackals, and hyenas. If human beings do appear on the scene, they are invariably assistants to the white people photographing the coverage. We are just as guilty of many of the distorted notions about Africa when one of our better paid comedians stars in a completely local movie about an African prince coming to America to find a wife in a fast food joint. Pinch me. A brother had to leave all the gorgeous females on the continent to come to America to find a woman. As my grandson says when he is profoundly puzzled or disappointed. Magazines, newspapers, pitifully small coverage. It's as though this giant of a continent doesn't exist unless there's a catastrophe, a coup, a war, or a famine. We have to work hard to change that. This next piece, and the final piece for today, is called The Ebonization of the New Yorker Magazine. This was written July 1/15. It might be mean-spirited to suggest that the prestigious New Yorker magazine has suddenly discovered African America. I'm sure someone must have told him about us before April '96. Maybe I'm becoming paranoid in my old age, but I find myself probing for the motivation or some motivation for the usually staid New Yorker to devote its hallowed pages to the thought, works, and accomplishments of African Americans. This actually happened. Did they feel compelled to ebonize the issue because of the O.J. verdict? Or as a delayed reaction to the Rodney King travesty of justice? Or the People magazine revelation that Hollywood sells black and nominates white? it would be worthy of an essence issue or object issue to detail the boardroom meetings that gave us Black in America in the New Yorker. That was a full-fledged issue they made, Black in New York. And it's a Black in America in the New Yorker magazine. The opening comment by Hendrik Hertzberg and Henry Louis Gates Jr. eloquently explained that African America has a different historical frame of reference than that of European America. It's always encouraging to read that some sort of disclaimer at the beginning of anything written about African Americans in America. It usually indicates that the creators / producers recognize that African Americans are not simply white folks with melanin enhancement. Beginning with the talk of the town and ending with Andrea Lee's Back to School, a memoir of an African American woman returning to the prep school outside of Philadelphia 30 years ago, she suffered through as one of the 2 Black students in the school. The issue was loaded. They have these separate headings for these different columns. This one is called The Talk of the Town. And the writing by John Eilerman about African American pollster Ron Lester made it quite clear that the Buchanan-Gingrich forces and Bob Dole's woolly speeches have opened the White House doors to a second Clinton term. The task for the president now is not persuasion. Black voters are out there, Lester says. The task is turnout. The mayor of San Francisco, Larry Bush, offers us a stylish glance at the politics of Willie Lewis Brown. Remember Willie Brown?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Attitudes of African Americans about the N-word by Touré. The consensus seemed to suggest that it ain't what it said, but how it's said. I don't think it should be said, no matter who says it. Me, personally. Angela Davis, Eldridge Cleaver, Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin, formerly H. Rap Brown, Jane Farmer, Maulana Ron Karenga, Kathleen Cleaver, Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, and Julian Bond were given the opportunity to give us bites of hindsight, what was done, what could have been done. Henry Louis Gates Jr. gave these 8 legends of the civil rights struggle / Black Power era a forum. Justice Clarence Thomas, profiled by Jeffrey Rosen, had his affinity to Booker T. Washington exposed. I say Booker. Booker.
Gotcha.
Malcolm Gladwell did a seamless job of exploring some of the reasons why West Indians and African blacks and American blacks are perceived differently by the usual suspects. Buddy Fletcher, one of the most successful traders on the New York Stock Exchange, was giving his props, almost. Too much attention was focused on his psychological side and not enough attention given his methods of playing the game. I want to know how the brother was making money. He wrote a book saying, hey, we want to be in the game too. But they didn't focus on that. They focused on his mindset. His mindset. He was greedy, like all the rest of them. We wanted to make money. And he was making money. The poetry of Derek Walcott and Rita Dove was sprinkled judiciously throughout the pages. Clearly a spicy move. In Reflections by a Patricia J. Williams, the lives of 10 black women who graduated from Harvard Law School, class of 1975, were examined then and now. On the sporting scene, John Edgar Weidman cleverly made us understand that Dennis Rodman is simply a player playing a game. No need to wander off into heavy-duty worship or panic because the guy wears panties. You know, remember when Dennis Rodman dressed up in a wedding outfit?
Yes.
And
yes.
people were saying, what?
Not.
And he's saying, mind your own business. David Remick profiled William Julius Wilson, an academic who has been studying the decline of Chicago's South Side for 25 years and offers the White House advice on matters of race, jobs, and poverty. Why the White House? Why not the American House? Mm-hmm. James Walcott gave us a quick slice of Terry McMillan, the Oprah of black fiction. Mm-hmm. I was frustrated by the brevity of the piece. Mm-hmm. Mary Ellen Marks' page-sized photos of Myrlie Evers Williams, chairwoman of the NAACP, and Coretta Scott King were unappealing. The photographer had the stunningly attractive Miss Evers Williams tilting her head and touching the left side of her face as though she's doing a toothache commercial.
Yes.
Coretta Scott King's pose is similarly commercial. She has her hands laced across her stomach as though she's measuring herself or dealing with a stomach problem. Mm-hmm. Ralph Ellison, the Invisible Man, had two recently discovered stories published, Boy on a Train and I Did Not Learn Their Names. Ellison was 80 when he died in 1994 and had been working on his last still incomplete novel for 35 years. Mm-hmm. When I hear things like that, it makes me feel like Speedy or something. Hopefully, the New Yorker will open its pages to many more living African American writers. A reporter at large featured the phenomenon called Minister Louis Farrakhan by Henry Louis Gates. The title of the profile was The Charmer, and it made an honest effort to deal with the Farrakhan factor, that element that exists in most African Americans that remains quiet, but remains. Minister Farrakhan is not saying anything to African Americans that hasn't been said before and is not being said privately. Now, we can look around any of our family circles and find a Farrakhan. My grandmother used to say, if you find yourself in a hole with a snake and a white man, go hug the snake. These pieces of folk advice have been handed down in African American families for generations. The sad thing about the whole business is that this advice stemmed from hands-on experience with the white people in America. Minister Farrakhan has taken folklore, charisma, self-preservation, and media savvy to another level. The profile offers us a many-faceted look at a complex man who's dealing with complex issues on several public stages simultaneously. I don't like the promoted idea that Minister Farrakhan is now the leading voice of black rage in America. Was the Million Man March about black rage in America? And how many people, black, white, have Muslims killed lately? And why must this assessment of the American dilemma be considered rage? The truth should not be automatically equated to something simply labeled rage. Give me a break. Chump. Angela Bassett, a crossover star by Hilton Owls. I got the impression the writer didn't know what he was talking about. If she was a crossover star, she would have won an Oscar for Waiting to Exhale. Physical is what they think of us first, all the time. Bassett says of white short-sightedness hardly sounds like the words of a crossover star to me. The all-black town of Boley, Oklahoma, and how that situation came about. Quite a few black towns in Oklahoma. Used to be, remember Tulsa? Mm-hmm. Fiction, Push, by Sci-Fi. One of those raw urban horror dramas about a 12-year-old baby having a baby. The language of the piece was properly ignorant. I say ignorant, I-G-N-U-N-T. It took me straight to the heart of the darkness. I'm looking forward to reading more of Sci-Fi stuff. Domestic life. an American family, a profile of the Jacksons. No, not Jesse and Jackie and how they met and what they've accomplished. No matter how you may feel about Jesse Jackson, politically you must give him credit for having come from zero. And finally, Stanley Crouch's gorgeous tribute to the inimitable Duke Ellington. I remember Stanley from the old Watts Writers Workshop days, and I'm still puzzled by his philosophical defense of his use of the term Negro to describe us, to describe African Americans. Oh well. I still can't figure out why the New Yorker devoted a whole issue to African America. There was even a handsome ad with a handsome black man selling a pretty black car. It wasn't African American History Month or George Washington Carver's birthday even. Maybe I shouldn't try to puzzle it out, but simply be content because the New Yorker decided to give us a little ink. Oh man. I'm going to end it there because that is where it ends and goes on to the next column, which is, let me read you, okay, I won't. But the title of it is Confronting the Scourge Called Prostate Cancer in Black Males.
Very good. So we'll deal with that tomorrow.
I'm trying to cover a lot of bases.
Yes, indeed.
It was really, really fun writing these two columns. Some of them really pulled a lot out of me because I was trying to be a voice for people who have no voice, but at the same time I was trying not to take it down to, you know what I'm saying, you know what I'm saying, you know what I'm saying, you know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
And when you start trying to do that, you discover there's some nuances and some layers and flavors and colors and shadings, and I mean that would take you all day long to write one paragraph. I couldn't take all day long to write one paragraph because I was writing like a column a week. It was published every other week, but you would have to have your column in, you know, in time. Because Mr. Edsham was he was a efficient publisher. On a few occasions, he just simply said the hell with it, wouldn't publish that week or that period because he decided to stop, take a vacation or something.
All right, yeah, probably cost of publishing even
but
back
it was
then.
called the African Times.
Right.
And like I said, I was there on the scene from 96 to 98. And
okay.
I'm reading these columns and I hope that they resonate.
Well, they do. And I want to send a shout out to Linda for retyping from the newspaper articles.
Oh.
Thank you very much, Linda.
Thank you, Linda.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
And with that, your website is www.odiehawkins.com. And totally appreciate these moments in time.
It.
Yes.